fall. Kingdoms once strong, now shaken, but we trust forever in your name, the name of Jesus. Whoa, whoa, we trust the name of Jesus. You are the only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. You are the only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. Unmatched in all his wisdom, in love, in justice you will reign. Every knee shall bow. We bring our expectations. Our hope is anchored in your name, the name of Jesus. Who do we trust? Come on, sing it. Whoa, whoa, we trust the name of Jesus. You are the only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. You are the only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. Whoa, oh, oh. Whoa, oh, oh. We lift our banners high. We lift the name of Jesus. From age to age you reign. Your kingdom has no end. We lift our banner high. We lift the name of Jesus. From age to age you reign. Your kingdom has no end. You are the only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. You are the only King forever. Almighty God, we lift you higher. You are the only King forever, forevermore. You are victorious. All right, got a little energy in the room this morning. That's right. So we're going to kind of move into a time, and I'm going to let Keely take this away. We got a new song for you here.
Sick and tired, being sick and tired. How much attention you think I can take? I am so done, so over being afraid. I've gone through the motions, I've been back and forth. I know that you're thinking you heard this before. I don't know how to say it, so I'm just gonna say it, yeah. Fear you don't know me, there ain't no room in this story. And I ain't got time for you telling me what I'm not, like you know me. Well, guess what? I know who I am, I know I'm strong, and I am free, got my own. I know me. Sing fear you don't know me. There ain't no room in this story. I ain't got time for you telling me what I'm not, like you know me. Well, guess what? I know who I am. I know I'm strong, brave, and I am free. Got my own identity. So fear you will never be welcome here. So fear you will never be welcome here.
Thank you, Kaylee. That is wonderful. Fear, you are not welcome here. That's called the breakup song. We are breaking up with fear. We're breaking up with that that's going to hold us back, that's trying to keep us where we are, keep us from moving forward. So I'm going to invite you to stand today because this song basically celebrates everything that Christ has done for us, this next one. And make this your prayer. Make this your opportunity to say, we are going forward together. No matter what stopped me in the past, what's held me back, I'm not going to let that continue to be my story. That I'm going to believe what God has for me. I'm going to believe what God has for my family and what God has for my community. And we are going forward with the power of God.
I am guilty, ashamed of what I've done. Would I become? These hands are dirty.
easy to believe that that's for somebody else? Isn't it so easy to believe that, well, yes, I'm sure that God loves them. I'm sure that God's forgiven them. I mean, they seem to be so much holier than I am. Or they seem to have it so much better, or even worse. Oh, well, but, you know, they've done so much. Obviously, God needs to forgive them. And it seems to be for everybody else but us. But this is saying that how can it be that this is what God did for me? That he sets it right, even when I've screwed it up. That he's made it right, even when I failed and faltered. When I can't think that it's for me, but it's for everybody else, that he says, no, this is for you, because if it isn't for you, it isn't for anybody. If it isn't for you, if it doesn't work for you, it can't work for anybody. It's not divided up according to how good we've been. It's not divided up according to who we are or what we look like or even what we believe. It is for everyone. It is the power of God for salvation for everyone who believes. God, we come to you today and we're so grateful that you've met us in this place. We know that you're everywhere, but it helps our faith to be here. It helps our faith to remind us that there are these thin places where your Spirit breaks through into our lives and where we can take the time to simply listen. And I know we've come today tired, and some of us had just had a week where we weren't stellar. We weren't proud of some of our actions and our attitudes. And we come to this place and saying, God, you know, we need you to right our wrongs. We need you to bring your transformation into our life. We can't do it on our own. We need your help. We thank you for the work of Christ that has made this possible, that you are the one that overcomes, so we have the power to overcome, that you are the one that sets us right so that we have the power to act right, that you are the one who set us free so that we have the ability to walk in that freedom. We give you thanks and we give you praise, and we just simply place ourselves here open and say, would you do that again for us today? We love you and we thank you for being that kind of God. Not only for ourselves, but for our families, for our friends, and for our community, for an entire world. And so we give you thanks and praise as you have shown us the prayer to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, and thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. You may be seated.
Are collecting socks to donate to the Emmanuel Care Center. You can donate downstairs. This is just one way to come closer to God. On March 23rd, we will be hosting a Vision Day workshop for our conference at 9 a.m. Everyone is invited. Our next Christ-centered yoga meeting will be right here, Saturday, April 13th. This is a great way to combine fitness and faith. The Young Adult Discipleship Group is going on a mission trip to the Florida Panhandle to help with hurricane relief. We are currently looking to reserve the dates for July 28th through August 2nd. The trip will require a deposit of $75 due at the end of this month from all who wish to come. Talk to Andrew Yoxick for more information. We will be having a talent show right here in the church this Saturday at 6:30. Check on your Connect cards if you're interested. You can vote for your favorite act with donations. All proceeds will go towards funding the mission trip to Florida. The media team is looking for volunteers for the 9:30 and 11 o'clock services, and someone to run the sound for practices with Revive on Wednesday nights. If you're interested, please talk to Andrew Yoxick, Pastor Vicky, or Pastor Shane. Our mission is to bring people one step closer to God, each other, and a hurting world. Your offering is vital for us to fulfill that mission each week.
Our community is depending on us. Thank you for being an answer to their prayers. To support our mission, fill out your envelope and place it in the kiosk as you leave. You can now give online and on your phone with Give Plus. Just look up our church, Girard First United Methodist, or use the zip code 44420 and follow the instructions to create an account and give. Or you can text to give at 330-871-3208.
Well, I'm so glad you're here today. I'm Pastor Vicki. It's great to be with you. Just to let you know, it's double point day because it's time change Sunday. So I don't know what the points are good for, but just in case that whole grace thing doesn't work out, we've got a few points. If you come to the talent show Saturday, it's triple points because the young adults are headed to Florida and to do some hurricane relief efforts and really need your support. So please come out and be a part of that. I won't tell you, I was going to tell you a couple of the jokes that we had, but I think maybe not because I think we're recording this, so let's not do that. But if you want to hear them afterwards, they're kind of funny. And we'll raise a lot of money. That I can promise you. So anyhow, I'm glad that you're here with us today. We are undertaking something kind of ambitious. We are going to walk through the book, the first part of the book of Romans during Lent. It's usually during this time that we encourage people to pay extra attention, just pick up an extra discipline in their spiritual life that can help them go deeper in love with God, deeper in their faith. And so we're going to walk through, up until Easter, the first part of the book of Romans. And Romans is an ambitious book to preach through. And so I hope that you'll be a part of it. I want you to know that in your handouts that you got today, you have some devotions so that you can be reading through that during the week. And you're going to get some of the stuff that we may not have talked about today, so it's going to take you a little deeper in your faith as well. And we'll have those every week. When you come, you can take that insert home with you about that as well. I would like to encourage you, I don't see Phil, so I'm guessing he's not going to give his spiel. He is the finance chair, and he shared with us today that if you are able to make your offering regular, it would help the church an awful lot. We ended up having to cancel church in January at the very time that we get the worst heating and electric bills. We had a couple Sundays where we had very low attendance because the electricity was out and it was 30 below zero. And so if you can make your giving regular, that would help us, because I have never been a part of a church that is so very judicious with their stewardship. They take there's no fat on the bones, and they do a very, very good job of making sure that every dollar we collect goes towards our mission to help bring people one step closer to Jesus Christ. In the process of that, however, we can't control the weather, and we can't control those things. And so if you are able to either make back up for those weeks that you weren't here, or maybe to reach in and give a little extra, the church could definitely use it at this time. We don't generally make pleas like this because we've been, but 3 weeks, that's what we call a black swan event, something that you just have to endure and be able to get through. So we appreciate your ability. In fact, we've added the app, the Give Plus app, allows you to be able to do that on your phone as we begin worships today. That can be part of your giving as well. So you'll be able to, most of you will be receiving a letter in the mail about that this week. So as we begin in Romans, we are looking at Paul, who used to be called Saul, and he is writing this letter to the people in Rome. Now, we don't know exactly when he wrote it, but we think he wrote it the mid to the late 50s AD. And the reason we think that is because we know that he's writing to house churches in Rome, and the house churches came about after 49 AD because they had what we call the Edict of Claudius. There won't be a test on this, but it just makes me sound smart to say that. So they had this Edict of Claudius that said that you were making too much of a disruption in the synagogues and the temple, so if the Romans demanded above all else that there be peace. Pax Romana, they call it. And so when the Jews and the Gentiles got together, those who followed Christ and those who didn't got together at temple or synagogue, they began to squabble. And they began to debate, and apparently they've debated very loudly and sometimes even physically. And they caused this disruption. And so the Romans stepped in and said, fine, you just won't be able to worship in your temple or synagogue as a large group ever again. And so they kind of dispersed into these house churches. And Paul was writing to them, trying to say, I want to come and visit you. I've tried to come and visit you multiple times, but I get thwarted every time I do. So you know what? I'm going to write down my understanding of this gospel. And I'm going to send it ahead. I want you to read it. I want you to pass it around to all the house churches so they can read it, because this is what the bare essence of what you need to understand about who I am and what this gospel is. Now, again, it's an ambitious undertaking. Most people back in that day, if they wrote on skins or parchment at all, it was just a paragraph or two that they sent to communicate for correspondence and business. And here he is writing this huge epistle, but he wants them to understand what this gospel is. He wants them to understand who he is, and he's sending this on ahead, hoping for the day when he's able to visit them and be able to be there in person. But he wants to make sure that they understand what it is that they are believing. He wanted them to understand what this gospel was that he wanted to share with them and that they had begun to believe. Now, in the first chapter, which is what we're going to look at today, the key verse in this chapter is not only the key verse for chapter 1, it's the key verse for the entire book of Romans. And it goes something like this. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. For in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. The entire book of Romans summed up in 2 verses. We can all go home, and we don't have to talk about this for the next 6 weeks, right? This is the key verse. This is, if we understand this, what Paul is going to do is he's going to take this verse and he's going to unpack it, the rest of this letter, the rest of Romans. He said, this is the gospel that I want to share with you. Now, he starts off by explaining earlier in chapter 1 that he is an apostle. And we don't use words like that much anymore, but an apostle meant that he was a sent one. It literally means a sent one. And it stood for the boats that they would send out to reach the people who'd been shipwrecked. And so an apostle was a rescue boat that would, apostolos, would come out and save you from the water, save you from certain death if somebody did not come after you. Paul is saying, I am an apostle. This is my job description. This is who I am. If you want to understand me, you understand that everything I'm about is about going out, being sent out to people to explain this good news to them. And the story of this, of Paul's story, his name was Saul at the beginning. He was not a person who even appreciated Jesus. In fact, he was a persecutor of the followers of Christ. He got permission to go all over the Mediterranean world to be able to persecute those people who called themselves Christians. He believed a particular way, and he was not about to have anybody else start a movement to follow this Jesus character. And so he would go into the various villages, and when he found out that there was a church there, usually in somebody's house, because it was a pretty small movement at the time, he would begin to persecute them. And in fact, the very first Christian martyr, Stephen, we see Paul standing there holding people's coats while they stoned Stephen, meaning that he was giving approval to killing this man, this innocent man, all because he believed something different than Paul did. And so Paul was this persecutor. He was this person trying to enforce the teachings, the Jewish teachings that did not include Jesus. And he's going to Damascus. He's heard that there are Christians there assembling. He's going to make sure that's not going to happen. And on the way, he is blinded by a light. He is literally knocked on his butt by the power of God and the resurrected Christ. And this will be the defining moment for his life. Everything that has led up to this will be nothing like what leads away from this. This is the defining moment of his life. He has an encounter with the resurrected Christ. And from that moment on, he understands the gospel and the power of God in the gospel. And he begins to be transformed and to be a sent one to help others here who've been shipwrecked, who are headed towards certain death. He is there to be able to share with them. So what does this verse say, this key verse, these two verses in Rome? He said, the gospel has the power to change the world. This gospel has the power to change the world. He said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ because it is the power of God for salvation to those who believe. We are talking about the power of God being unleashed in this world. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm going to talk about the power of God, I'm going to talk about earthquakes and tornadoes and hurricanes and tsunamis. And he said the power of God that was poured into one person to bring him to life. This is the power of God for salvation. This good news is the power of God for salvation. Now, when we talk about salvation, this word's kind of come to mean that, well, you know, I can just hope that when I close my eyes for the last time, I'll open them and I'll be in heaven. But that's not only what this word salvation means. This power of God for salvation is not just for us four no more. It's not just for everybody who believes exactly the same thing. This power of God and salvation is for the entire earth and all of creation. You see, it had been set on a path. Every one of us had been set on a path. All of creation had been set on a path of decay and decline and destruction. But what the power of God unleashed in the person and the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ was the power for salvation that fundamentally changed, going from decay and death to life and wholeness. Our complete trajectory changed, not only as people, but as a planet. Said this power, this gospel, is the very power of God in the human heart, not the hurricanes, not the tornadoes, the power of God in the human heart to bring salvation. And watch that bring salvation to the world. Now, this word also, when it says he's bringing salvation, this is not something that just happens once. Have you ever talked to somebody, maybe you've said this yourself, well, I asked Jesus to forgive me when I was 5. And I'm like, that's fabulous. What have you done lately? What's it like now? Because it's kind of like, salvation is kind of like when you got married. You remember, for those of you who are married, when you stood at the altar, what did you say? You said, I love you today. I love you today because I know how much money we have, or, well, it's a wedding, how much money we don't have anymore. I know what our situation is. I know what our house looks like or is going to look like. I know who you are today. And I love you. And I want to be your husband. I want to be your wife. But you're also standing there saying, and I'm going to love you tomorrow. And tomorrow, when you got your big beer belly and maybe your hairline's back to here, or tomorrow when the wrinkles come, and tomorrow when all of a sudden now we've got 3 kids running around and we don't have any time for each other and we're tired, and I'm going to love you then too, richer, poorer, sickness, health. I'm not just committing to love you today with everything I know. I'm committing to love you tomorrow, even if I don't know what's going to happen. Salvation is the same way. Salvation said, Not only is God saving us today, not only is he transforming us today, but he's transforming us tomorrow and the day after and the day after and the day after. You say, but Pastor Vicki, you should have seen me yesterday. Yep, salvation is for them too. And the worst part of it is, I'll probably do it again. Yeah. And salvation is for tomorrow too. But you see, this power of God that is for salvation, it starts by transforming us first. Yes, it's for all of creation. Yes, it's put us on a path of life and wholeness rather than decay and death. But it starts with an individual heart. It starts with our individual life, making that kind of transformation. It starts here and ripples out. I was reading a biography of a woman, and it was very fascinating. She told a story how she had one of these addictive personalities. And she was addicted to cocaine, she was addicted to alcohol, and she was addicted to sugar and flour. And so she tackled the hardest one first, and she went to NA, Narcotics Anonymous. And she worked through the steps, and she got off of cocaine. And then she said, I went to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I found another community, and I began to work the steps with them. I began to find ways of coping without alcohol in my life. And she said, it was so helpful. And she said, and finally the day came. All right, it's time to work on this addiction I have to sugar and to flour. She said, so I went to an Overeaters Anonymous. And I walked in the door, and she said, and there was all fat people there. And I'm thinking, what did you expect to find? It's Overeaters Anonymous. And then she explained this. She said, when I walked into NA, and I walked into AA, she said there were people sitting there with their 25-year pin, and there were people sitting there with their 30-day pin. And there were people that you knew messed it up last night. But you had all of those different people there. When I walked into Overeaters Anonymous, I needed to see some people who were getting skinny. I needed to see people who were succeeding at what they were doing. Because if there's nobody there who's skinny, or at least on their way to being skinny, then probably becoming a session where everybody just sits around and talks about how they messed it up, and oh well, I'll try again tomorrow. But nobody really succeeding. He said, I needed to know that there were people there who'd been successful for 25 years, people who'd been successful for 30 days, and people who binged last night but were here to start again. I needed to know that this group was helping transform people's lives. You see, that's what the gospel does. It transforms, but it starts with us personally. So when you walk in here, you are going to see people who messed it up last night, and you're going to find people who finally found the power to forgive after years after the divorce. You're going to find people who still struggle with their temper, and people who got a hold of that years ago and can help you figure out how to get a hold of it too. There are going to be folks who get up an hour early. Why anybody would do that, I don't know, but I hear people do that. They get up an hour early to read their Bibles and pray, and that they've been doing it for years. And then you're going to hear about the rest of us who stay up late and pray before we go to bed and find ways not to fall asleep when we do. There's going to be people all along this continuum, but I submit to you the same thing. If you walk into a church and we look exactly like we looked a year ago, and we still haven't made any transformation in our lives, we've missed the power of God, because the gospel is the power of God for salvation to those who believe. To to the individual first and to all of creation as a part of it. It has to start somewhere, and it has to start with you, and it has to start with me. We have to live discovering how Jesus can be more and more the Lord of our lives. How the transformation happens. Because it isn't only for you, but it starts with you. The gospel isn't only for you, but it does start with you. The gospel is magnetic. This gospel is magnetic. He explains how in Rome, that's going on in the Mediterranean world, Christianity was very small, but yet it was growing exponentially. Because this gospel, this good news that God isn't mad at you anymore, you know, that God has given us the answer to this rift, this divorce that's between us. This powerful good news is magnetic. It's going to make a difference when you understand it. It's why Paul was so intent of writing this down, so they could understand what it was truly about that God had done for them, because it becomes like a magnet to draw people. They were growing exponentially. You know, one of the ways that they were growing was through their funeral societies. Now, we don't have those things today, although I think we may end up moving to something like that eventually. Back then, it was so expensive to bury your loved ones with everything, with the whole, you know, they didn't call them wakes, but the whole wake ahead of time and the funeral and the burial and everything that needed to happen. People couldn't afford that. And so they banded together in these funeral societies, and when Martha's mom passed away, everybody in the group would contribute so we could have a proper funeral and burial for Martha's mom. And when Joan's husband passed away, we all pitched in and we came together for Joan, the worst day of her life. The worst day of her life. But we were there. And that's what the Christians did. That's what the Christians became a part of, because it was a physical demonstration of the power of the gospel, of the love of Christ being physically demonstrated at the worst day of your life. We're there for you. It was kind of like what we did yesterday. Yesterday, we opened our doors for a grieving family. Layla was the young woman's name. She had asked if she could rent the facility because her mom had become a missing person 25 years ago. And I said, sure. I said, is there anything that you'd like me to do? I'd be happy to help you if there's anything. And she said, would you say a few words? I said, great, yeah, absolutely, I'd be honored to do that. And so we sat down and we began to talk, and she says, oh, well, half of my family's Catholic and the other half's Muslim. And I'm like, I think a Methodist has something to say about that. Yeah, apparently when you mix Catholic and Muslim, you get Methodist. I don't know. I did a whole lot of research online, I can tell you that, because you never know exactly what you're supposed to say and not supposed to say, because I'm not familiar with either one. Not very familiar with either one. But what I knew was that I had a young woman who lost her mother and needed a visible, tangible demonstration of the love of God. And I knew that they weren't finding that in either camp that they had drawn their sides to, but that we could be neutral territory. And we could love them by simply helping them celebrate the life of a woman who lost her life 25 years ago. And we had 4 or 5 people from our church spent hours here yesterday so that they could afford the funeral they never had 25 years ago. Visible demonstrations of the love of God on people's worst day. That sounds like good news to me. And that sounds pretty magnetic to me. Now, what will happen, I don't know. But I do know that every one of those folks in the family walked out of here knowing that we loved them knowing we love them. This gospel, this good news is magnetic. Does anybody know they got to talking about these Scotty dogs that were little magnets? Does anybody remember those? Sorry, I'm looking to some of our gray-haired members. Apparently it was a thing. I don't remember them. We didn't have any money when I grew up, so we just had little magnets that looked like washers, but like little quarters. And but apparently they had these Scotty dogs that if you put them nose to nose, they attracted, and if you turned them around, they repelled. And well, that's exactly how this gospel works. That there are times when we are drawn to it, and we have to admit there are times that we have even parts of ourselves that are repelled by it. But this gospel is magnetic. That when we're open and people demonstrate the love of God, it's like those two Scotty dogs coming nose to nose. The love of God visibly demonstrated through his people. The good news. And somebody's openness to receiving it. It is magnetic. Not only is the gospel magnetic, but this is where we get to, again, our key verse. What does Paul say? He says, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. And that's why we called our series Unashamed. He said, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ because it is God's power for salvation to those who believe. He said, this has been my life's work. I am the boat. I am the rescue boat going out to help people whose lives are being destroyed. And I am not ashamed of that. Now, this word ashamed doesn't just mean I feel unworthy. This word ashamed means embarrassed because I picked the wrong side. Embarrassed. You know, like when you pick the wrong major in college and you're just sure that an art history major is going to make you tons of money for the rest of your life. And you're like, what do I do now? Or, I got a better one. Your agent calls. You've been drafted into the NFL for the Browns. They're going to be good. Next year. They're building. It's a building year. I've heard that every year since I've been married. Oh, the Browns, it's a building year. That's what this word ashamed means. It means ashamed means to be personally embarrassed because you backed the wrong horse. Personally embarrassed because you chose the wrong team. Personally ashamed because you devoted your life to something that wasn't worthy. He said, I am not ashamed. I have given up everything since that day that God knocked me on my butt. I have sacrificed everything in order to bring this message to people, and I didn't back the wrong horse. I am not ashamed. I did the right thing, and I would do it all over again, and I'd sacrifice everything that I had to sacrifice again. I'm not ashamed of this gospel. I am not ashamed what I've dedicated my life to, because it is the very power of God that's transforming the world. Started by transforming me, and it's going to take this world by storm. I am not ashamed. I am unashamed. Now, as we begin this series, I want to challenge you, and I want to bring us to this point today where we simply say, you know what? There have been times that we have been ashamed to speak the good news. There have been times that we have kept our faith hidden. There have been times when we have been embarrassed. We think, well, my faith is private. Listen, your faith is personal. It was never meant to be private. It is the power of God. You are a sent one. There are people whose lives are being dashed on the rocks from the shipwreck. And we want to say, but it's simply my private faith. That's not the gospel. The good news starts with you, but it doesn't stay with you. But we have to be unashamed. Now, I'm not talking about taking a big black Bible in your arm and going into work. I am not talking about thumping somebody over the head, becoming the sex police or the cussing police. I love it. You tell somebody you're a pastor and all of a sudden they stop swearing. So I just drop a couple in there just so they'll feel a little more comfortable, you know? I thought about giving up swearing for Lent, and I thought, I think I better choose something a little more attainable, like giving up chocolate. It's, all this, they expect us just to make this all about behaviors, about some sin list. They think that we're just going to judge and condemn. That's not the good news. We've been sent out with good news, the gospel, the good news. It is the power of God. But we got to get past our embarrassment. And it's so much easier to say, oh, you shouldn't drink, smoke, or chew, or go with girls who do, when the gospel is, I will walk into your shipwreck with you. And I will love you no matter what. And I will speak God's words of forgiveness and kindness and redemption over you. I will inconvenience myself so that you have visible, tangible demonstrations of God's love. We got to be the sent ones. So what I want us to do today is I want us to pray. And first of all, I want to simply ask God to forgive us for those days that we've been ashamed. We've been ashamed of our faith. We've been ashamed of the team that we've worked for. And to ask God to transform us first, but not last. That he would send us to the people who need to hear the good news. I'm going to ask you to stand with me as we do this prayer. And I'm going to begin by praying and bringing up a topic, but I want you to pray. This is not me praying for you. This is you praying with me. Dear God, thank you for the chance we have to be here today to hear the good news, to be transformed, but also to be sent with that same message. Would you forgive us for those times we've been embarrassed to be on your team? We're sorry that we didn't understand. And sometimes we just walked away. Forgive us and make us new. And God, would you transform us from the inside out? That this good news would go deep into our very being. That it wouldn't be the tornado or the hurricane outside, but it would mess us up on the inside. We would find ourselves with the ability to forgive. We'd find ourselves with the ability to share our faith. We'd find ourselves with the ability to transform our temper and our selfishness and our pride, and to find ourselves serving you instead. And then would you send us to everyone else who needs to hear this? Would you send us to other people whose lives are being shipwrecked? could see ourselves as apostles, as sent ones, as rescue boats. Thank you that somebody did this for us. Thank you for the privilege of helping to do this for someone else. And we commit to you this day that we will not be ashamed. We will not be ashamed of you. We will not be ashamed of the good news. We will not be ashamed of our church family. We will not be ashamed of your power in our life. In your name we pray. Amen.
If you've been walking the same old road for miles and miles, you've been hearing the same old voice tell the same old lies. If you're trying to fill the same old holes inside, there's a better life. There's a better life. You got paid. For the light of day in the dead of night, but we've all found ourselves worn out from the same old fight. But we've all run to things we know just ain't right. There's a better life. There's a better life if you got paid. He's a pay taker. You receive it. If you can't feel it, somebody testify. If you believe it, if you receive it, if you can't feel it, somebody testify, testify. If you believe it, if you receive it, if you can't feel it, somebody testify. If you got paid, he's a pay taker. Oh, if you feel low, he's a way maker. If you need freedom, a saving, he's a prison shaking savior. You got chains, he's a jailbreaker. Oh, if you need freedom, a saving, he's a prison shaking savior. You got chains, he's a jailbreaker. You want to be a part of our final blessing? Go ahead and lift your hand up. Lift up two hands, maybe. Oh no, nobody gonna do it with me? All right, I'll be a trendsetter. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Chris. Be unashamed. Don't hide. Don't be nasty, but don't be afraid. Be unashamed of the gospel. It is for you. It is for everyone. Go out and be Jesus to somebody this week unashamedly.